Welcome to the Bible Nexus podcast, where biblical history, geography, and theology converge to fortify our faith in the living God. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Habana and Andy Olson.
Episode 5. Welcome, Ryan.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a fun journey so far, exploring these different facets that we've come up with in regards to the Bible Nexus.
And I've been looking forward to this episode. A little bit of history to it, I guess, as a group, with our ministries.
Yeah,
going back to films that we've worked on together.
exactly. This is one of the topic that we're looking at tonight is central to the Conquest film that we did, and it's something that really has found its way as a mainstay, at least in my teaching, in both expositional preaching as well as going cover to cover, that I've talked about. And this will be a big part of the Bible Nexus as well, because the question that we have before us oftentimes is, where do we find Jesus in the Old Testament? And that is a great question to talk about. And the truth is, he's all over the place. And that's the topic tonight, is we're going to be looking at this Malak. Malak is a Hebrew word. And we'll be talking about some translational issues. We'll be talking about historical appearances. We'll be talking about just big picture Bible stuff tonight.
Cool. Well, you gave the listeners some homework before we left our last episode. Hopefully you've read your homework if you're listening. If you didn't hear at episode 4, maybe you could pause. We gave you Exodus 3, Judges 6, and Zechariah 3. You could go back and read those chapters and then hit play and continue listening.
Yeah, and we'll be going over them in the podcast tonight. But it's good to kind of take a look at what we're going to be looking at and see what you think of without commentary, coloring your perspective, and then see how our perspective perhaps differs or confirms what you've read. But this is a big deal to me because Christ on the way to Emmaus, if you remember the day of his resurrection, there was the two people he encountered, and they were downcast because they thought Jesus was the one. Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to them, Jesus is actually there, raised from the dead. And he says, "Oh, slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to first suffer and then enter into his glory?" And it says, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he spoke to them and opened the scriptures to them on all the things concerning himself. So the law and the prophets have all sorts of information regarding the Messiah. Now, typically, we often just think of prophecy. Mm-hmm. That, Jesus is in the Old Testament in prophecy or in pattern. And the truth is, one of the biggest ways Jesus is in the Old Testament is he's actually there. He is actually personally appearing. And that is something that when I've gone through the Old Testament in the cover to cover that I do, the Village Schools of the Bible, teaching cover to cover, which I've done now for, I think, 13, 14 years. What we're going to be talking about tonight, this is probably one of the most revolutionary things for most people, is having their eyes opened to the person of Christ in the Old Testament. And let me just give this as a caveat. What we're going to be talking about tonight is just one facet of it. We're going to be talking about the facet of his name, Malak, and what that term means and how it functions and how it is connected to a definite person in the Old Testament. And this person, we'll see, once you see it, you start to see all sorts of connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament. We're going to be making some connections to the New Testament here to show definitively that this one that appears in the Old Testament, I would say definitively, this one that appears in the Old Testament is indeed the pre-incarnate Christ, the pre-incarnate Jesus. He just wasn't known as Jesus during those days.
Cool. Where do you want to begin?
Well, first off, even though he appears in Genesis, I think the best place, a nexus, so to speak, is in Exodus chapter 3. And Exodus chapter 3, we'll use this as kind of a springboard to start talking about this one who is called Malak Yahweh. And we'll pay particular attention to both those terms, Malak Yahweh, and what they are pointing to. So, just so we're contextualized, in Exodus chapters 1 and 2, we have the first pogrom, the attempted eradication of the Jews in Exodus 1, and then we have the preservation of Moses in chapter 2, and then we read of Moses fleeing to Midian because he killed a man. And it's in Midian, which is to the east of Egypt, we see Moses has an encounter.
Modern day Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's what I think. Mm-hmm. Because as we'll see, this happens at Mount Sinai. So that's another question that we could probably explore in some future episode, is the location of Mount Sinai. Very fascinating discussion and debate about where Mount Sinai actually is. But nevertheless, let's take a look at Exodus 3, verse 1. We read, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Oreb, the mountain of God." So this is Mount Sinai. Oreb is another name for Mount Sinai. Then I'll just read this in the English, and then we'll talk about it. "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Why is the bush not burned? When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called out to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So this is an appearance of God, very clearly here. In fact, we have three names that are listed here. We have the angel of the Lord. We'll talk about that in a second. The angel of the Lord. Then we have God, Elohim. And then we have Yahweh. And so we have God, because it says, then Yahweh saw that he had turned aside to see. So we have all three names here. Now, what I will contend is there's not three persons here. There is one.
Okay.
There is one. There doesn't seem to be any change.
This isn't a Trinitarian reference.
I don't think so. Okay. I think that we have, again, the name Yahweh, the name Elohim, and then the name the angel of the Lord. Now let's stop there. This is kind of our study for this evening. The angel of the Lord. Now I am going to contend that this is a bad translation.
Okay. You know, I was just going to mention, we're in episode 5, and we've been reading scripture, and we've never mentioned that we're using the English Standard Version.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
if you're curious, wondering what it sounds roughly what I'm reading, but it's not exactly. What version is this? We're in the ESV.
We're in the ESV.
We tend to always be in the ESV.
Yeah. So. And well, the thing is translations themselves are not inspired. Translations can be in error. Mm-hmm. So that's why we say the scriptures are inspired in their original manuscripts, because there's all sorts of translations out there that are that not only are bad, but sometimes just literally butcher. They're not even really translations. So another topic for another time. But yes, we're using the English Standard Version. But most English versions do use the term angel of the Lord. So this isn't just an ESV deal. This is most English translations still call it the angel of the Lord. Now here's why I'm going to contend that this is a bad translation. What translations are supposed to do is communicate something to the reader. Translation is a great challenge. It really is, because you're translating from in this case, the Hebrew, into something that the English reader should grasp.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's this word for word versus concept for concept kind of challenge.
Yeah, that's always there. You have word for word, which is more of a literal one, but sometimes it can be kind of choppy in the way it's read, and when you're more word for word, and then the concept for concept dynamic, sometimes you lose some of the accuracy with that. But the term angel here is not a good one, because what do we think of when we hear angel?
A created being.
We think of a created spirit being, right? That's the first immediate thing we think of. And the Hebrew word here is kind of the term that we're going to be looking at throughout this study today, is Malak, not Melech. Melech is king. Malak is messenger, or one who is sent. So that's the meaning of the word Malak. The Hebrew word is Malak, and the meaning of the word is one who is sent, or a messenger. And this term here the context tells us that Malak is God. Now, as Trinitarians, already it's amazing to look at in the Old Testament and understand, well, this one is God, but he's also one who sent. Well, who sends God?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is,
that also raises the question, when you're looking at the whole Trinity, it's not just the Son that's sent. The Holy Spirit is also sent.
And it's sent and who sends the Spirit? But Jesus does.
Right.
So that's the fascinating thing. We're even kind of connecting to something to the New Testament. Mm-hmm. In the book of John, Jesus is constantly saying, the Father sent me. Father sent me. So it's a functional term, Malak, sent, one who is sent, a messenger, an envoy. And the one who is sent in John is of course Jesus. Now, Jesus is sent in a very unique way in the New Testament. He is sent in human form. But then you're right. He sends the Spirit. I will send the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And so
I assume you're going to lay out the case for why this is the Son and not the Spirit.
Right. Yes. This is the Son. And the interesting thing about this is Jesus constantly in the New Testament is presenting himself as one that is sent by the Father. And as we look at the function of this Malak Yahweh, the Malak Yahweh is in what's called the Shmikut form in Hebrew. And it's just not to overly complicate things, but it's both terms are united. They are kind of inseparable. They both inform one another. Okay. So this is Yahweh who is sent. And the ancients, when Malak Yahweh came, they understood Malak Yahweh as an appearance of God. And there's been some kind of revolutionary study over the last 50 or so years within scholarship about Second Temple Judaism, even before Jesus was, and how they perceived the Godhead. And this Malak here is the Lord, but he's also sent. So that presupposes at least two, mm-hmm. right? And so there was in the Second Temple period before Jesus came, as discovered in the Aramaic Targums and some of the commentaries that we find from ancient times, the plurality of the one God was not something that was really radical. For instance, the beginning of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I would contend that within both Jewish and Greek minds, that opening sentence wouldn't have been all that radical. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What was radical was verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That became the stumbling block for both the Jews and the Greeks. Mm-hmm. You being a man, make yourself out to be God. And so, returning to Exodus 3 here, we see it opens up, and Malak Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire. So that's the term, this Malak. Now, he's one who's sent. Sometimes it's Malak Yahweh, sometimes it's Malak Elohim, but we're primarily going to be focusing on the appearances where he's named Malak Yahweh. So my contention is this appearance of this individual is a divine appearance. It's an appearance of God. But it was also understood that he was sent. Now, the ancients had this theology of two powers in heaven, a seen and an unseen one. And so Malak Yahweh was understood as the seen God. This is the one that is seen. And the Most High is one who dwells, and we even see this kind of in the New Testament. The Father dwells in unapproachable light, which no man has seen or can see. So God is here and is making an appearance. And so when God is seen, I'm convinced throughout the Old Testament, it is primarily, it's got to be the Son. It has to be the Son, the Son of God. Now, there's going to be additional clues here as we read on that are really going to factor into our understanding that this is, of course, Jesus. Now, first off, he says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So this isn't the first time he's appeared. This isn't the opening here.
Sure.
We go back and we see the word of God appears to Abraham in Genesis 15. Malak Yahweh speaks to Abraham out of heaven in Genesis 22, saying, you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So he speaks as God. But he's also one who is sent, a Malak who is sent. Now, let's, because of time constraints, because this could be a really long episode, because the thing is this Malak is all over the Old Testament. And it's surprising how often we see him. We see him in the times of the patriarchs. We see him in the time of the Exodus. We see him in the time of the conquest. We see him at the time of the judges. We're going to look at that. We see him at the time of the judges. We see him at the time of the monarchy. We see him at the time of the post-exilic prophets. We see him at the time of Elijah. This isn't something that is rare as far as finding him in the Old Testament. It is probably, his appearances throughout history were probably rare. It wasn't that he was appearing to everybody all the time. Sure. But in our
talking 2,000 years
right,
history. Right.
But as far as what is recorded, we have him all over the place. Mm-hmm. Now, in verse 13, Moses says to this one who appears on the burning bush, and he says to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. This is the key breadcrumb here. He says, tell them that I am has sent me to you. Now, there is a connection in the New Testament that I believe is a definitive connection to this text, which informs us that it is actually Jesus who is speaking to Moses here.
Can I take a guess?
Yeah.
When Jesus says, before Abraham was born, I am.
Yep. And I didn't even give you the homework. But let's turn to that text in John chapter 8. And you guessed correctly. But we'll look at it in its context. Now, Jesus is having a debate with his countrymen, and it turns very heated. And in verse 56...
Oh, I got to scroll.
In verse 56, he says, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham." Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was," and there it is, "I am." Now, this is in the Greek, and the Greek is ego eimi, ego eimi. And in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, "I am" is ego eimi. I am is ego eimi. Yeah. So we have that connection. And did they get throughout John, usually Jesus is being misunderstood. But in verse, they got
it on this one.
They got it. They picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So they understood that he was saying he was the God who spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. And so this one who, again, we have conceptual things that tell us that this is Jesus, that he's one who's sent. So Jesus being sent by the Father isn't something that started in the New Testament. It started at the beginning
in the garden.
In the garden, yeah. So he's been sent. He's the sent one. That's why it's so some people ask me, well, how would you translate it then? What I would love is if all translations simply used the Hebrew, the name Malak Yahweh. If you had that, people would learn it, and then they would see it all over the place, and it has a certain punch to it. Malak Yahweh. That's what we used in the film. Mm-hmm. Malak Yahweh. We kept that translation over and over again. So in the Conquest, the film, you could see that connection. And by the way, if you want a copy of the Conquest, message us somehow, and we'll find a way to get it to you. Yep.
Yeah.
So how would I translate this? Well, first off, Malak Yahweh. But if we wanted an English translation, messenger of the Lord is probably better because it takes away that dynamic of angel, which again is I don't think it's a suitable translation because he's not a created spirit being. This is a sent, the one who is sent, a messenger sent from God, but he is God. And so Exodus is the nexus. Exodus 3 is the nexus for this Malak Yahweh dynamic because it points us back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the one that appeared to them. And it points forward because it ties us to the debate in John chapter 8. It ties us to that, the before Abraham was, I am. Now, this is just the beginning. We're gonna see a lot of fascinating texts. The next text I'd like us to look at is in Judges. So let's turn to Judges chapter 2.
2. I had 6.
Yeah, but we'll go to Judges 2 first. I didn't want to overwhelm you with homework.
Okay. We're going to work our way up to 6.
6 is next.
Okay.
So this isn't that Malak Yahweh hasn't appeared in the interim. He has, and sometimes he's called Malak Elohim. But he is the angel. He is the Malak that you would find, and again, you'd find the term angel. So when you're reading your English translations, when you see the term angel, think of whether or not this is speaking of the divine messenger or whether it's speaking of something else. In Exodus, for instance, the term Malak is always used either of God or a human, never used of a created spirit being. So we need a kind of a revolution in regards to understanding this term Malak in the Hebrew scriptures, because it will help us see the Christology of the Bible. Now, in Exodus, God says, I am sending a Malak, and you need to listen to him, because if you disobey him, he will not forgive your sins. So this Malak has the power to forgive sins. Sounds familiar? Mm-hmm. He has the power to either forgive sins or to withhold sins and not forgive them. And in chapter 2, verse 1, we see this is in the wake of the conquest, and they did not ultimately clear out the land. They made covenants with the people, and they did not listen to the voice of the Lord. So we see in verse 1, now Malak Yahweh went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give your fathers. So this is interesting. It says that he is the one that brought them out of Egypt. Malak Yahweh did. This isn't in your homework, but let's turn to Jude chapter 5.
Jude verse 5.
Jude, yes, I'm sorry. Jude verse 5, there is only one chapter. Now, Jude, this is, again, a New Testament connection. In Jude verse 5, the ESV gets this right. It says, I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. Another place in the New Testament which speaks of Jesus being there during the Exodus is in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul speaks of that in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So the New Testament recognizes that it was Jesus. Now, I brought you, going back to Judges chapter 2, I brought you out of Egypt and brought you into the land that I gave to your fathers. There's a very interesting geographical connection here because it says that Malak Yahweh traveled from Bochim, or from Gilgal to Bochim. And Gilgal has that circle of stones from the 12 tribes, which is a reminder that the Lord brought them out of Egypt and into the land. Mm-hmm. And Bochim is likely Bethel, which is a place where God swore to Jacob he was going to give him the land. So when he says, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give your fathers, Gilgal and Bochim are geographical places. This is a great nexus type deal where we see history, geography, and theology all converging. History being, I brought you out of the land of Egypt and into the land I promised to give your fathers. Geography being the places that he marked these things. And the theology is, this is the Son. This is the Son doing this. And he says, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare to you. And as soon as Malak Yahweh spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and there they sacrificed to the Lord. So another evidence that Malak Yahweh here is God. He's God. He comes and he says, I brought you out of the land, and that I swore to give your fathers. So this is the Lord speaking, but it is also the sent Lord. The Lord is speaking, but it is his messenger, who is also by very nature him. He is God. He has all the attributes of God. He speaks as God. But he's sent also by God. We're finding this in the Old Testament. This is New Testament theology we often think of, but it's something that is embedded in the Old Testament.
Well, this is, I find this rather exciting because how many times did the Lord himself in his earthly ministry, and even after, you talked about the road to Emmaus, right after his resurrection, talk about the scriptures and presenting himself in the scriptures.
Right.
And obviously the first word of the New Testament hadn't been penned yet.
Right.
So he's walking them through
the Old Testament.
And we often, as Christians, we focus so heavily on the New Testament that we kind of lose that.
And that oftentimes is unfortunate, because you truly can't understand the the New Testament apart from the Old, just as you can't really understand the Old Testament apart from the New as well right now, because we do view the Old Testament through the lens of the New still. That is a blessing. But we have to view the New Testament in light of the Old, because the New Testament is just soaked, saturated in the law and the prophets. And so this Judges now, Malak Yahweh appears several times in the Judges. And probably the most dynamic time is in then Judges chapter 6. And again, let me stop and just say that, remember, the appearances of Jesus in the Old Testament are not exclusively just under the name Malak Yahweh. Debar Yahweh is another one. Debar Yahweh is the word of the Lord. And that's
interesting in and of itself.
Very interesting in and of itself. And that's another name that he goes by. But when we hear the word of the Lord came to someone, we often think that maybe it was just a disembodied voice or something like that. But there are plenty of scriptures that indicate that when the word of the Lord came to someone, it was a physical appearing. Like the word of the Lord came to Abraham, and he brought him out of his tent and told him to look at the stars. Well, the Lord is there. The word of the Lord is there. And again, that would be the main backdrop of, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the other interesting thing is as far as that, Word and messenger are kind of connected. The Word is the message. The message. The message is the Word, and the messenger is the one who brings it. And so this is the one that comes, whose name is the Word, whose name is also Malak. Messenger, Debar is word in Hebrew. So in chapter 6, we're in the midst of the Judges. And the Judges is an interesting period of time, because the Israelites were in disobedience. And we really don't want to think that when the Lord brought relief, it was because the Israelites got their act together. When the Lord brought relief, there's this cycle in the book of Judges. The book Judges is the period in between the Exodus and the conquest and the monarchy. So, 1370 or so to 1050 or so, that's kind of the window of the Judges.
Okay.
And the Lord oftentimes shows up to give them relief, even though Israel's going after other gods. And they cry out because the curses are coming upon them, whether it be famine, whether it be persecution and those things. But there's a man named Gideon. And we're not going to look at his whole story here, but we're going to look at that which is associated with Malak Yahweh, and that's the call of Gideon. So in verse 11, we read now, and I'm going to, and rather than reading angel of the Lord, I'm going to just use the term Malak Yahweh. And now Malak Yahweh came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abizarite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. So Gideon was a chicken. He was hiding the wheat from the Midianites at this time because the Midianites had come in to ravage and plunder the Israelites. And in verse 12 we read, and Malak Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, O man of valor, or mighty man of valor, or O mighty warrior, could even be a translation here. Now you can't say the Lord doesn't have a sense of humor. Because here's Gideon the chicken beating out wheat in a wine press, and he comes and calls him a mighty warrior. And right away, Gideon demonstrates that at this time, he really isn't some man of ultimate valor, because he says, please, my Lord, If the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our father recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. Now, there's irony here. Because he says, first off, he says, where are all the wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us? Now, the one who performed those wonderful deeds is right before him. So there's just great irony here. The one who performed them all. But here we understand that Malak Yahweh is incognito, meaning Gideon doesn't recognize him. But he does seem to appreciate that this is a man of some importance. Mm-hmm. It's not until later that he's going to find out this is the Malak Yahweh that's there. And then in verse 14 we see, and Yahweh turned to him and said, now isn't that interesting? Yahweh turned to him. So Malak Yahweh is Yahweh. So this isn't all of a sudden a switcheroo, that all of a sudden the Father comes and Malak Yahweh disappears. This is simply another way to refer to Malak Yahweh. Malak Yahweh is Yahweh. And so Yahweh turns to him. And by the way, this could be another, some more fodder for a future episode, just the name Yahweh. What does it mean? How do you pronounce it? All of those controversial things that could be a good episode for future reference. Mm-hmm. So the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. And he said to him, if now I have found favor in your sight, then please show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring my present and set it before you. And he says, I will stay until you return. Now, the context bears out that Gideon does not realize truly who this is. I think he thinks it's a person of some importance, perhaps a prophet of God or something like that. But Gideon then goes and prepares a meal. And then we see in verse 20, and Malak Elohim. So we have the angel of God, Malak Elohim. Same person, just another way of speaking of him. Said to him, take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on the rock, and pour the broth over them. And he did so. Then Malak Yahweh reached out the tip of his staff that was in his hand, and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes. And fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And Malak Yahweh vanished from his sight. So here now we see, and Gideon perceived that he was Malak Yahweh. So this is Gideon perceiving that he is Malak Yahweh. He's now understanding this is the God of the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the one who spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. This is the one who delivered us out of Egypt and brought us into the land. And so Gideon says, alas, O Lord God, for I have seen Malak Yahweh face to face. So there is a fear of death. They realize that Malak Yahweh is God, and there is this right conception that if you see the face of God, you may well die. The only way you don't die is if the Lord grants peace and grace to you. And so what the Lord does is he says to him, shalom, or peace to you. Do not fear, you shall not die. Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it the Lord is Peace. To this day it still stands in Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. So most that are initiated into the scriptures know the general story of Gideon. So he goes at the strength of, even though he has ebbs and flows of courage, he goes in the strength of this Malak Yahweh. And he delivers with the strength of just 300 men that the Lord whittles it down to. that he whittles it down to 300 men in order to deliver the Israelites from the Midianites. So we have him in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Genesis. We have him with the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. We have him delivering the children of Israel out of Egypt, which we see in Judges 2 and in Jude verse 5. And then we have him strengthening and appearing to Gideon. And the reason why this Gideon episode is so convincing is we see that this is one who is sent by God, this Malak that is sent by God, and he can take the form of, at least in the Old Testament, oftentimes he takes a form that's kind of incognito. You don't know it's him, which kind of reminds you a little bit of the way to Emmaus. Mm-hmm. You know, he cloaked himself. They didn't know it was Jesus.
Yeah.
And then he broke the bread and their eyes were opened and they ran back with great joy to Jerusalem. So, thoughts so far?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, I'm just kind of soaking it all in. But yeah, it's. I had a question. Maybe I was going to wait till later.
Why not? Why not now?
Why not now? And that was this instance of the angel of the Lord appearing to Daniel. Well, not specifically Daniel, but his friends that were thrown into the fiery furnace.
Yeah, I see 4.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the homework. It wasn't even on your extended homework, but just another instance that popped into my mind of the angel of the Lord appearing in the Old Testament.
Yeah, you find it all over the place. You really do. And I think the translation angel of the Lord kind of veils it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just kind of might think it's a general angel here and there. They're the angel of the Lord. Oh, it's a general angel that came. Where if you see in the Hebrew this Malak Yahweh in the Shmakut form, you see its strength throughout the texts. And we're not done. We have 2 more big texts we're going to look at in the Old Testament. And so we're kind of going a little bit historically, and now we're going to go to the time of David in 1 Chronicles 21. In 1 Chronicles 21. Now, in 1 Chronicles 21, David is reigning as king, and he takes a census. And this was not a wise thing to do, taking a census. David's census, the reason why it's not a good thing to do is the Lord did not want them to be confident in their numbers. And that's something that you saw in the episode with Gideon. 32,000 fighting men came, and what did the Lord say? Too many. Send all who are fearful away. Went down to 10,000. Too many. Then he gives them this test at the water, which whittles it down to 300 men. So with 300 men, he's going to demonstrate the power of the Lord against the Midianites. Well, David takes a census, and it is something that is very displeasing to the Lord. And in verse 7 of 1 Chronicles 21, we read, "But God was displeased with this thing, and he struck Israel. And David said to God, I have sinned greatly in that I have done this thing. But now please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have acted very foolishly." And the Lord spoke to Gad, David's seer, saying, "Go and say to David, thus says Yahweh, 3 things I offer you. Choose one of them, that I may do it to you." So Gad came to David and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, choose what you will, either 3 years of famine, 3 months of devastation by your foes while the sword of your enemies overtakes you, or else 3 days of the sword of the Lord, bringing pestilence in the land, in which, or with Malak Yahweh, destroying throughout all the territory of Israel. Now decide what answer I shall return to him who sent me." Then David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Let me fall into the hand of Yahweh, for his mercy is very great, but do not let me fall into the hand of man. So there's a question. One of the questions here is, did David choose none of the above, or did he choose number 3? And there's a little bit of a debate there, but I think it's probably number 3, because the hand of the Lord is where it says the Lord.
We sent the pestilence.
Pestilence, yes, the sword of the Lord, the pestilence on the land. So it's directly from the Lord, and he's depending on the Lord's favor. So one of the things to realize here is Israel was in disobedience at this time. There are parallel passages that note that this wasn't just a David thing. This was an Israel thing as well. Israel was in disobedience to the Lord. So the Lord is bringing the curses of Deuteronomy 28 through this. Now,
I think I would have picked that too. I mean, you've got 3 years, 3 months, or 3 days. It'd be,
and the Lord.
Just get it over
and that's
with.
What
Let's just get it over with. It's going to be painful.
Yep. And he says, let me fall into the hands of the Lord because he's merciful. And that's what we're going to see here is the Lord isn't going to, this is going to get cut short. The Lord is going to show mercy, and we'll see that he does it to Jerusalem. So the Lord sent a pestilence on the land, and 70,000 men of Israel fell, and God sent the Malak. So that's, again, the Malak. Not just an angel, but the Malak, who was working destruction to destroy it. But as he was about to destroy it, Yahweh saw, and he relented from the calamity. And he said to the Malak, who was working destruction, it is enough. Now stay your hand. Now this is very interesting, because this is Malak Yahweh. Here is one of the kind of few places in the Word, in the Old Testament, where we see communication between the Most High Malak, or the Most High Yahweh, and Malak Yahweh, the sent Yahweh. So they're communicating with one another. Now, Malak Yahweh is the one that is there in Jerusalem, working destruction, and he's being commanded by the Most High Yahweh. So this is a very interesting text which shows us interaction between, if we're going to use New Testament terms, we're seeing interaction between the Father and the Son here. Mm-hmm. And he said to the Malak who was working destruction, it is enough, now stay your hand. And then we see Malak Yahweh was standing by the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And David lifted his eyes and saw Malak Yahweh standing between heaven and earth. And in his hand a drawn sword stretched over Jerusalem. So the threshing floor of Ornan is
where the temple is.
Yes, exactly. It is the land, and it'd be north of the so-called city of David. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and you're absolutely right. It's where the temple is going to be built. So this is where Malak Yahweh is, and so the Lord is orchestrating something here, and we then go down to verse 18, and we see Malak Yahweh commanded Gad to say to David that David should go up and raise an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So here we see the orchestration here is done by Malak Yahweh. Go and offer up a sacrifice on, this is Mount Moriah. So this is the same place where Isaac was offered, and Malak Yahweh showed mercy there, saying, stay your hand. Malak Yahweh is the one that said, stay your hand. Do not harm the boy, for now I know that you fear God, that you have not withheld your only son from me. Here we have Malak Yahweh again instructing David to go to Ornan. Now let's read how this shakes out. So David went out at Gad's word, which he had spoken in the name of the Lord. Now Ornan was threshing wheat, and he turned and saw the Malak, the messenger, and his 4 sons who were with him, and hid themselves. And David came to Ornan. Ornan looked and saw David and went out from the threshing floor and paid homage to David with his face to the ground. And David said to Ornan, give me the site of the threshing floor that I may build on it an altar to the Lord. Give it to me at its full price, that the plague may be averted from the people. Then Ornan said to David, "Take it, and let the Lord do what the king seems let my lord the king do what seems good to him. See, I give the oxen the burnt offerings, the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for a grain offering. I give it all." But King David said to Ornan, "No, I will buy them for the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor burnt offerings that cost me nothing." So David paid Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the site. Now, this is kind of humorous because this is the purchase of the Temple Mount, is what it is. Mm-hmm. This is the purchase of the Temple Mount. And a lot of Jews look back and say, "See, it's ours. We paid fair and square for it by our ancestor David." I find that kind of humorous. Of course, the Temple Mount is the most contested piece of land in the universe. But nonetheless, who orchestrated this? Malak Yahweh did. And so David built an altar to the Lord and presented the burnt offerings of peace offerings and called upon the Lord. And the Lord answered with fire from heaven upon the altar of burnt offering. Then Yahweh commanded the Malak, and he put his sword back in his sheath. So the plague was averted. So the Lord did show mercy. He did not give Israel to the full exhibition of his wrath at this time. And so when David said the Lord is full of mercy, even within this episode, we see the orchestration of Malak Yahweh having the purchase of the Temple Mount. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I don't know if there's anything to this, but in 2000 BC, Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, and you have Malak Yahweh in heaven saying, stay your hand, do not harm the boy. In 1000 BC, you have Malak Yahweh standing in between heaven and earth. Mm-hmm. At 1000 BC. What's fascinating, 1,000 years later, there's the incarnation.
Right.
And he's going to make his first visit when he makes his first visit to the temple. It's fascinating. It's because it's
anything interesting happened there in 1080.
In 1000 AD?
Yeah, in Jerusalem.
Well,
because you seem to be following 1,000 year.
Yeah, so 1,000 years later,
right?
That's when,
and then we'd be ripe for the next 1,000 years right about now.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah, 1000 AD. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting thing to think about. So yeah, you have these 1,000-year increments of big, but then you have the Malak Yahweh, or the it's almost like a descent.
Right.
Heaven, midway between heaven and earth, and then the incarnation, and you have the arrival on the Temple Mount. For the first time Jesus visits the Temple Mount as a child he's just months old, and Simeon takes him in his arms and says, "Behold, the salvation of the Lord is here." So that's an interesting thing to think about. But again, we have Malak Yahweh. Interestingly, turn to Second Chronicles 3.
Okay.
In verse 1, when Solomon begins to build, he says, "Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father."
Yeah, there you go.
So Yahweh appeared to David his father. Well, who appeared to David? Well, it was Malak Yahweh. But here it just says Yahweh. So it's a shared name. It's truly Yahweh. He's sent, but he's also Yahweh himself. So another confirmation here. Now, the final passage we're going to look at before we'll kind of open it up and see if there's any other New Testament things that we can consider. But this is one in particular that I find just soul stirring, and that's Zechariah chapter 3. Zechariah chapter 3.
Very short chapter. It all fits on my iPad mini screen.
Yeah, it's not a big one. It's a vision.
10 verses.
Yeah, 10 verses, and Joshua is the subject here. And Joshua is not the Joshua of the conquest. This is the high priest. We're in the post-exilic world here at around 520 BC. So again, looking at patriarchs, Exodus, conquest, judges, monarchy. One that we didn't have time to look at, but there was the Malak Yahweh appeared to Elijah a lot. So Elijah was one that he appeared to quite a bit, which is interesting because he appears to Moses quite a bit too. So you have Moses and Elijah, and Malak Yahweh appears to Moses and Elijah quite a bit. Two interesting figures that show up later in the scriptures. But this is Joshua the high priest, and he says, and this vision, it says, then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before Malak Yahweh, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. So Malak Yahweh Joshua is standing before him, and Satan is accusing him. So the scene here is a scene of judgment, and the judge is Malak Yahweh, and Satan is accusing Joshua. Now Joshua is the high priest, so he's the representative of Israel, and the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this a brand plucked from the fire? Now Joshua was standing before the Malak, clothed with filthy garments. So, filthy garments. You're not supposed to be in the presence of the Lord. As a high priest, you're not supposed to have filthy garments. And these are like dung-stained garments. So I believe the message here is not just about Joshua, but it's about Israel. Joshua being the representative of Israel as the high priest. They're filthy. And then we see the Malak said to those who were standing before him, remove the filthy garments. And he said to him, now this is interesting. Remember, earlier it was said that this angel, this Malak, has the power to forgive sin. And the angel said to those who were standing before him, remove the filthy garments from him. And to him he said, behold, I have taken away your iniquity, and I will clothe you with pure vestments. And I said, let them put a clean turban on his head. So they put a clean turban on his head and clothed him with the garments. And Malak Yahweh was standing by. So what is being... The removal of filthy garments is symbolic. We see that very clearly because he says, behold, I have taken your iniquity away, and I will clothe you with pure vestments. So how is it that one can take one's iniquity away? Well, this is a good theological question that we need to step back to consider. Again, I think this is pointing forward to the cross. And this imagery is something that we find picked up on in the book of Revelation. They have, in fact, let's go there. In Revelation chapter 7, because this really we will see that the way that Joshua was cleansed is the same way we are going to be cleansed, or are cleansed. In Revelation chapter 7, we have this great multitude standing before the throne, which I believe is the raptured people of God, the resurrected people of God, and they're clothed in white robes. And in verse 13, the elders addressed me, saying, who are these clothed in white robes, and where have they come from? I said to him, sir, you know. And he said to me, these are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So there we have how the removal of iniquity actually occurs. The clothes are made white in the blood of the Lamb. So this clothing in pure white vestments is indicative of both sin, either sin or righteousness. Sin or righteousness. And how are we clothed in righteousness? Well, everything, whether it's the Old Testament looking forward or the New Testament looking back, everything points to the cross. And this one that is called Malak Yahweh, when we get to the New Testament, such a dynamic figure that is all throughout the Old Testament. All of a sudden, you don't see him show up anymore as Malak Yahweh. Why? Because he became flesh. And he's known now by the name Yeshua or Jesus. And like I said, for instance, that Jude verse 5, Jesus delivered a people out of Egypt. And 1 Corinthians chapter 10, they put Christ to the test in the wilderness. Christ was there. So this isn't something. The interesting thing about this is this whole doctrine of the angel of the Lord or Malak Yahweh being Jesus, this isn't something that is really all that controversial as far as my research in church history, both modern and ancient church history. The percentage of people that would agree and say this either for sure is Christ or is likely Christ in the Old Testament is pushing probably the high 90%. And I'm talking about people that hold a high view of the Bible, that see the scriptures as the word of God. Both in the ancient church fathers, they saw, yes, this angel of the Lord was our Jesus in the Old Testament. And even, I mean, it's not like anything is unanimous these days. Sure. But again, if this is something that people would say, well, boy, why haven't I heard? I mean, a lot of people have said, why haven't I heard this before? Here's why I think you haven't heard it before. Because of the neglect of the Old Testament. Because of the neglect of the Old Testament. Because we're not digging into the Old Testament as we should. And when we dig into the Old Testament, we unearth things that connect us to the New Testament. That's why this is so exciting, is our Lord is the Lord of all history. He's the one that made promises to Abraham. He's the one that spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. He's the one that said to Moses, I will be with you. And the same one that said, I will be with you to Moses has said, I am with you to us. In Matthew 28, when he gives the Great Commission, he says, go into all the nations and make disciples. And behold, I am with you, even to the end of the age. And so he has said it to us. That same Lord that told Moses, I'm with you, the Exodus is going to happen, and you're going to come back and worship God on this mountain. He did it. Making disciples of all the nations. Is it happening? Yes. And we're participating in it. So practically, I think it's a very exciting doctrine.
It is.
To grasp. And I'm still discovering things. I mean, I've been knee deep in this study for a dozen plus years now, or more. And there's still all sorts of nuggets and rocks that are unturned in regards to these things. Like that whole, the whole Gilgal and Bochim thing that we talked about in Judges chapter 2.
Yep.
And how that was related to the next thing he said, is when he said, I brought you out of the land and brought you into this land that I promised to give your fathers. That was connected, that those lands were connected to that, or the locales were connected to that next verse that he speaks. I never even noticed that until a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yeah. So, again, I think this is great fodder for future study for people. There's so many rocks that are unturned, and to know and recognize that when the Lord appears in the Old Testament, I don't know if there's ever a time when it's not Jesus, when the Lord appears, because the Father dwells in unapproachable light, and the Spirit is Spirit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a fascinating study.
I think it would lead into another great study and getting kind of more into the specifics of each of the persons of the Trinity. You know, what makes each one unique? What is it about the Father that sets him apart from the Son, that sets him apart from the Spirit, and
then what unites them? And I think it's an issue of function. Oftentimes, what you would say, they're united as one God in righteousness, but they're distinct in personhood, and so they're united in attributes. They're distinct in personhood and in function. And so, I agree. It's a fascinating.
But to get into that without falling into, say, modalism,
Right.
or whatnot, that or other heresies that.
Yeah, you can go on one side being modalism, or you can go the other side, which is they're like separate beings.
Tritheism.
So, yeah, and there's a whole spectrum there. And that's one thing, and I hope I don't get myself into trouble by saying this, but I think with the Trinity we need to certainly leave room for a good amount of mystery. We can have our doctrines and our creeds,
but I think this study we just went through shows that there are distinct. Nuggets of truth that was meant for us.
Of course.
That distinguishes the Father from the Son.
Right. Yeah, of course. And even like Jesus says things like the Father is greater than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean? Well, that wouldn't have been that for those that had the concept of these two powers, the Most High and the Sent One, that wouldn't have been that.
He also says that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Right.
So you see that synergy of their natures.
Nature. And when he says things like, I always do what the Father commands or what the Father does. What the Father does, I do. That's why he's the messenger. That's why he's the seen one. He's doing everything that the Father commands him to do. There is no disobedience. There is no swerving from the will of God. He is the perfect one that conveys not only the commands and the word of the Father, but the essence of the Father.
Right. Well, what do we have coming up next time?
Next time we're going to shift from the person to the land. So we're going to look at the promise of the promised land. And your homework for next week or not for next week, for next episode, is going to be, first off, read Genesis 12 and 13, and Genesis 15. And then a big chunk, if you want to bite it off, Ezekiel 36 through 48.
That's a big chunk.
Yep. And that's tedious reading, by the way, but it's something that I think is important for us to get at. We'll spend a good chunk of time talking about Ezekiel.
Okay.
Because we'll be talking about the promised land. We'll be talking about the conquest. We'll be talking about things like the modern dynamic of the promised land. And then, probably most importantly, the future of the promised land. So the promised land is, of course, the land of Israel, or center stage, with Jerusalem at its heart. And we'll explore the ins and outs of the land that God promised to Abraham and his offspring in the next episode.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to that. Thanks again for another fantastic discussion.
Excellent. I look forward to our next one coming up pretty soon.
So, Lord willing, we'll be back in December with the promise of the promised land.
You've been listening to the Bible Nexus podcast. Be sure to check out our website for further information and materials at thebiblenexus.com.